Scene 6, let's find April, then we'll get that Bogart shredder. Bogart's an interesting use of vernacular there, game. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 The Manhattan Project. In the last part, we went through stages 4 and 5, and now we're gonna do 6 and 7. The Techno-Drome here, I'd say, is the first level in the game I would call a pain in the ass through and through. And that continues through for the rest of the game. As while it's a long level on its own, it's just got a lot of enemies, and they really like to surround you in ways that just makes getting hit cheaply very easy to do. This is also where we outright start running into a lot more of the robot enemies, because while we've seen Mousers and some flying enemies here and there, we get these little weird robots who I think have a name, but I actually forget what it is. These ones are annoying to fight just because they can throw out their sonic wave attack without really much warning, and that can just easily knock you out of your jump attack locks like that, so be careful. If anything, if you're low on health, using your special attack is really good against these things. Mind you, that's just a true case for everything, barring boss fights here and there. But easily the most notable enemy that this stage introduces is the... I think they're meant to be uncloaked foot soldiers, I think? The C-3PO looking guys we saw about a minute ago, maybe 2 minutes now. I say as we're only a minute 34 into the video. Because they are the healthiest enemies in the game, barring some variations of the rock soldiers. It takes 2 throws to kill them, which is more than most enemies take. They're not too annoying to fight despite that, though, because they don't have that many close-range attacks. They mostly try to hit you with their little laser guns, which leaves them very open to attack anyway. If anything, they're more annoying because their backdashes they have to try and get away from your attacks are honestly really effective. And if they're in groups of enemies with other varieties, they can be a little annoying to fight. Thankfully, it doesn't happen too often because the way this game likes to do its enemies is it likes to just throw several of a single variant of enemy at you at a time. It doesn't like to mix and match too much until later this stage, sometime in the next stage, or even the final stage. Whereas if you compare that to Turtles 4 or Hyperstone Heist, for instance, they like to start off the game at least throwing that at you, but by even like stage 3 or 4, it's like, alright, we're gonna throw two varieties at you, react accordingly. Either way, in the manual, the Techno-Drome's bio is the shell-shaking legend of the Techno-Drome lives on. Tackle the terrors of Shredder's lair and you'll be one tough turtle. Yeah, I'd say it's about right. It's also one of the few times they actively have the projectile-using enemies just kind of spam. I would honestly think they would do this more often in beat-em-ups, period, just as a way to kind of zone you and have a unique set piece, but they don't really tend to in a lot of the older beat-em-ups, at least. Mind you, it could just be because I played a lot of the console parts of said beat-em-ups growing up, so I didn't really get to experience the arcade stuff. Because, like many others, that's admittedly an atmosphere I sort of missed out on growing up. Because I was born in the late 90s, so I didn't have access to many arcades. There's a couple here and there, of course, and as we reached into the 2010s, barcades became more and more common, but I haven't really been to one of those yet. My only real arcade experience growing up often was, like many kids, Chuck E. Cheese's. And even then, my Chuck E. Cheese's didn't really have a lot of general arcade games. They had, like, Arctic Thunder. I think they had a Terminator game down the line, like, close to Terminator Salvation-ish. And I want to say they had maybe a fighting game of some sort, but I don't remember what. Like, I remember when I was surprised, prior to the pandemic, that I went into the arcade that my mall apparently had for a while, and I just wasn't aware of. I thought it was like a cheap little kiddie ride area. They actually had, like, Soul Calibur 3, one of the versions of Street Fighter 3, I think, and, like, the Luigi's Mansion arcade game. But that closed down to the pandemic, so, can't really do that anymore. Alright, so here we got blue rock soldiers. They are easier to deal with despite being healthier than normal rock soldiers, because they don't have as many weapons to begin with, and they move slower. The base ones can just obviously easily become like that, but when they eventually get their own weapons, which is a sonic laser gun like the little guys have, they're very easy to deal with because you can just jump kick through them, and the animation of their being stunned takes long enough that they can't get a shot off in time before you jump and try to hit them again. Pretty easy to deal with. I do like the latter half of the main Techno-Drum level, though, before we get to the boss fights, because we honestly get some nice little visual set pieces, at least like this foot soldier assembly machine. I'm assuming this is meant to be your assembly line, at least. If only because it literally just spices up how things look. Plus, right after this, we get one of the few semi-platforming set pieces the game has in any regard. Not that it's a really hard one to get around, but at least it is one. Because how do you guys like conveyor belts? After we take care of this mess of robots, it's going to start moving and we're going to have to fight some enemies on it. But it's not just literally we're moving automatically kind of situation. You might notice those orangey red panels in the back there. Once this thing starts moving up, those are going to start firing lasers out in two altitudes, low and high. Jump over high, stand under low. Now deal with this while also dealing with foot soldiers. It's not much, but it does a lot to make the latter portion of this stage feel more interesting. Again, NES platformers, or not platformers, beat-em-ups in that regard, either lack things like this and are less interesting, or you got some stuff like what Double Dragon does, where it relies on this perhaps maybe a little bit too much. There's a healthy balance to hit, and it really does feel like, for consoles at least, it took until the Super Nintendo Genesis era to really figure that out. Arcades probably had it better for a while in that regard, just because they were more advanced systems by that point. Unfortunately, the fun ends there because we're coming up on the first boss fight for the stage. And I say it's a first boss fight because health-wise it feels closer to a normal end-of-stage boss than it does the mini-bosses have thus far in the game with the Mousers and Slash. Because it's time for a movie cameo. Hello, Razor from TMNT2. Razor is a bit of a weird boss to talk about because his main attack is blowing sonic waves at you, which leaves him very open. But occasionally he'll start revving up his feet and go for a charge attack that's very hard to dodge without using a special attack just to clip through his hitbox, where he just runs over you and does a 1-2 slap to the face. He can also notably just hold on to blowing the sonic waves for a while, and that does leave him very open. But in terms of, like, the damage you can take, this is a fight that can be pretty troublesome. This is a boss where if you die during it, even though I stuck with Raph, I'd probably recommend switching over to Mikey or Leo for their special attacks, because they'll either keep you in place long enough to hit him multiple times when he's just blowing out his sonic waves, or it'll give you... The kangaroo kick will give you enough vertical distance to maybe escape a lot of his attacks. Yeah, here he goes. He only really tends to start sticking to a side of the screen to blow away constantly when he's at the lower portion of his health. I forget they do that a lot, just because this is one of the few times the game actually makes a boss's pattern change when they're low on health. Well, I guess it happens more than I think, because the one boss that grabbed the pipe earlier. But it's time for boss 2 immediately. Oh, hi, April. Oh, hi, Shredder. Shredder is not to be underestimated. While he doesn't exactly move too fast, he's got quite a few sword attacks, namely a slash, a thrust forward, a kick he can do just to combo you out of something in case you're comboing him, or he's got Sigma's wall kicks right out of Mega Man X1, and he'll usually use that to try and close some distance if you're too far away. But if you're low on health and using Raph, it also leaves him very open to just a hit-and-run tactic with the special attack. That doesn't make him easy, but makes him probably easier than he should be for this point in the game. The biggest thing you need to fear with this particular strategy is his little wake-up attacks after you've stunned him, because those can come out within frames, like that. Either way, Shredder, harder than Razor, not exactly hard with the right strategies, you can see. But hey, we got April back, and now we just have to fix Manhattan. Thank you. Look! Isn't that Krang's spaceship in the sky above Manhattan Island? Hey, Shredder's getting away! Oh no. There's more game? You don't say. It's not like I already said there's 8 stages. And we're on to the funniest stage to me. Hey, Turtles, take to the sky. We can't let Shredder get away. So allow me to tell you the story of elevator stages in beat-em-up games. An ever-existing constant, yet not exactly liked by anyone. But yet, they always are here. The first 2/3 of this stage, roughly, are just an elevator section where they throw wave after wave of variety of enemy after you. And it can be a little threatening in some regards, more so because of the pit that exists on the bottom, I think top, and far right of the screen. As you can see, it's not instant death if you fall into it. Like I mentioned before, the pits in this game basically just do 1 to 2 hits of damage. What is dangerous is how enemies can smush you like that in some cases. But also, some of the enemies really do have the power to knock you off of it entirely, so you could end up taking like 3 or 4 hits of damage real quick if you're not careful. It's particularly the spear-holding foot soldiers that can really do that to you, because like I mentioned back in like stage 3, their knockback is basically an entire screen length. Be careful. I guess in a way the reason we see so many elevator sections in beat-em-ups probably comes down to A, they're easy to design, B, you can have one be most of a stage and it'll stand out from the rest just because of that. But if you're not careful, it becomes very easy to make them very uninteresting or repetitive. Like, as much as I love Streets of Rage 2, that game did not need, how many was it, like 2 or 3 elevator sections period throughout that game? Not needed. Not needed at all. Thankfully, compared to some levels like this in beat-em-ups, though, this isn't the entire level, it's just like the first 2/3, first half or so. Past a certain point, we do end up on a rooftop, which is more so just to have a setting for the boss fight, probably. That's not this, but at least there's a little bit of stage before that, because, yeah, like, I immediately think of the last stage in Streets of Rage 2, actually, because I just brought that up. Most of that final stage is just that elevator, and then you arrive at the top just for the final boss gauntlet, because it's technically 2 bosses. You know, I say it's actually like the last third of the stage that's on the roof, but now that I look at the actual timeline, I guess the elevator section just feels longer than it actually is, because we're on the rooftop for the rest of this part, and we're only about the 1/3 part of the stage anyway. Alright, rooftops, not much special though. There's some sections where they cut the amount you have in half, like you'll just be on the bottom half of the screen for some of it, but not a lot to write home about. I will say though, if you are epileptic or prone to any kind of photosensitivity, be careful towards the boss fight, because there's a giant neon sign flashing between like off yellow and white, and I could see that maybe setting off some people. I should note, by the way, we've been doing pretty good throughout the LP of losing a life per stage but gaining it back just from score. Once you get past 500,000 to 600,000, that usually gets a little tougher to do, as I feel they're just rarer by that point. I think they increased the score threshold for it. So be a bit careful with that. Obviously, you have 3 continues to lean on them by default in most cases, but it's still good to keep in mind. Mind you, something I'm not entirely sure about is if you roll past the score that would give you an extra life while you're at, like, the stage clear screen, if it actively gives it to you. I want to say it does, but sometimes I swear it doesn't. Also, in the manual, this stage is known as Vertical Point Tower. Soar to the roof on an open-air gondola on the outside of the building. Don't look down and you may get flattened by falling obstacles. So even the actual manual only really focuses on the first third of the stage, which, interesting, but okay. The girder-holding rock soldiers are probably some of the most annoying variants of them, because they have a surprisingly wide swing, and they will not care if you're attacking. They will try to get their shots in, and that's gonna hurt. Thankfully, for the most part, enemies do only do 1 shot of damage per attack in the game. It's really just falling into pits that does more than that. In fact, the only way that I can think about off the top of my head where a normal enemy will do easily more than 1 damage is actually something, if it's happened, I haven't really talked about it. Enemies can actively grab you to get behind your turtle, and your health slowly drains while they hold you. You need to mash the control pad and the buttons to get out of it. Just make sure while you're doing so, you're maybe not pressing A slightly before B, otherwise you'll just special attack out of that, and you might not want to lose that health point. Be a bit careful there. These particular foot soldiers always make me laugh. They only charge across the screen with their little laser wall once, and they come back on screen with just punches. Later Turtles games, in fact, this very game in the next stage would usually have that sort of foot soldier variant be more so a bonus point kind of deal, where they go on stage once, leave, and then just leave because they're meant to be more of a hazard. Speaking of hazards, that weirdly reminds me. The game has a very funny anti-piracy check in it. Essentially, the game checks if the copyright characters and text have been modified at all. And if they have, by whatever means, the game, very quietly, reduces the damage you do by about, I think, half, doubles the damage you take, disables any of the cheat code menus, and makes Shredder invincible. I'm not sure from memory if it's the Shredder fight we did this part, or if it's the final boss. I'm gonna say it's probably the final boss, because that's the kind of troll behavior I expect, and I think is funny. But I like when game developers get petty with stuff like that, even if it doesn't do a lot. Like, I think it was Alan Wake just adds an eye patch if it detects you pirated it. Serious Sam 3, there's the sign, by the way, so potential photosensitivity warning. I think it was Serious Sam 3 had the invincible scorpion enemy that shows up in stage 2 that just follows you through the rest of the game. And I think there's even some speedrun categories that just keep that thing around. Let's see, what else was there? Earthbounds is pretty famously funny, where it increases the encounter rate to an extreme extent, and will crash intentionally before the final boss. I think after it does that, it erases your save file. Funny stuff like that is just great to me. You don't really see it a lot nowadays because how the piracy field has changed. Because usually back then, if you were doing some sort of pirated copy, you were at least still buying a pirated copy in some form. Whereas nowadays, your hard fiddly-dee's a little bit different. Once we get that sign centered in the screen, though, we're gonna be at the boss fight. I think we just got a wave of these rock soldiers, then some red foot soldiers left, I think? And you're gonna want to be careful with the boss fight here, because similarly to Razar, it can very easily counterattack you if you're not careful. Although, similarly to Leatherhead, it's also very easy to get it into a form of a lock, because it's time for Razar's compatriot Toka. Toka actively has a shield he can use to prevent you from using jump kicks. But his main attack is just running straight at you and doing very quick jabs. If you use Raph, you can just clip through it, lead him to the other side, and just do that over and over again. He does jump and try to do his own little charge move eventually, but by and large, he's very defensive. Which makes sense considering he's a snapping turtle. If you're using Raph, this strategy should serve you well overall. That's right, his charge is a jump, which again, you could just special attack through. Gotta say though, good on Shredder for actually putting some advertising out there for the Foot Clan, getting some rooftop billboards to try and advertise and get new members. It's the only real Foot Clan to do that outside of Rise. Mind you, it's like most of the time the Foot Clan's just robots. And there we go. That's that stage done. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 4, we're going to go finish off the game. See you guys then.